Today I'm going to talk a bit about faith, okay? Which is a big word, a big subject. Does this sound okay? It doesn't sound so good up here. Okay. What is faith? I'm just going to give you some basic definitions which will not be on the final exam, and you can probably look them up in your own way. But the Merriam-Webster dictionary has faith as being allegiance to a duty or a person, fidelity to one's promises, sincerity of intention, and those kind of mean nothing to me, but then a belief and a trust and a loyalty to God, belief in the traditional doctrines of a religion, firm belief in something for which there is no proof, which I don't totally agree with, complete trust, maybe, something that is believed especially with strong conviction. And then we have the word believe, which is to have a firm religious belief, to accept something as true, genuine, or real, to have a firm conviction as to the goodness, efficacy, or ability of something, to hold an opinion, to consider to be true or honest, to accept the word of evidence, or to hold an opinion. Okay, that's kind of what the secular world says. We don't hold true to what that is, because God defines what faith really is. But there's two words in the Greek, which I do not expect you to know. But if I would take the word believe, I only kind of put them as a kind of a jumping board. There's two words, Pisteuo, and that's Pisteuo, and Pytho, Peitho. Pytho to me is a solid form of faith. Frequently it's translated as to be persuaded, to obey, or to be convinced. And I think that in the world of faith is kind of part of it. It isn't just an empty belief, but there is a desire to actually be persuaded and to be convinced. This is just kind of very, very rough introduction before we get on to to the Bible. Okay? So, turn to Hebrews chapter 11. Okay. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. You all there? Good. All right. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Faith is substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. Has anybody kind of read that and thought, what does that even mean? Yeah, come on. Let me honest. It's like, it's a rather bizarre thought and a bizarre verse. And I last weekend, I decided to read this book here. This is The Holiest of All by Andrew Murray. I'm not a big Andrew Murray fan, but this book, The Holiest of All, is one of my favorite books. It's big, but the chapters are 4 pages and 6 pages long. So you'll read a couple of verses, and it's just a very simple, it's very much an anointed book, I think, and it just speaks to me. And I read this, and I just want to read from this, because I found this to be a good place to me to jump off from. So this is about what he says about Hebrews 11:1. Just as we have our senses, through which we hold communication with the physical universe, so faith is a spiritual sense organ through which the soul comes into contact with and is affected by the spiritual world. Just as the sense of seeing or hearing is a dormant power until the objective reality, light or sound, strikes it, so too faith in itself is a sense with no power beyond the ability or capacity of receiving the impressions of the eternal. It is an empty vessel that wants to be filled with its unseen contents. Only when the eternal realities draw near and exercise their power does faith become the substance of things hoped for, the foundation that they lie in the soul, the proof or conviction of things unseen, the convincing power with which these eternal realities give evidence and proof of their own supernatural existence. That's quite a mouthful. Most of those things, they make more sense when you read them yourself. You know, when you hear it, it kind of like, it's just so quick and it's... But I had this thought. It hit me almost before I finished reading it. Can faith be proof? Can faith itself be proof? Can faith be evidence and proof? Think about this. We have eyes. What is the purpose of eyes? To see. Why do we need to see? Because there's something to see. Why do we have ears? To hear. Why do we need to hear? Because there's something to hear. So could we say that the purpose of faith is for believing? And that the reason we need to believe is because there is someone to trust? This could be a somewhat convoluted thought, but I liked it when I read it here, and I kind of developed it and I meditated on it. The fact that I have faith, it could almost be seen as evidence that there is a being in which I have to have faith. If there was no God, why would I have faith? I know the evolutionists might disagree with that. Richard Dawkins might have an issue with that. He believes that faith is an anomaly, a defect in the human evolutionary process, which does not explain why it hasn't been eradicated. If it's a defect, it would have gone. But the fact that we have it after all these years means that it must have been put there for a purpose. And it all just, the fact that we have faith, to me anyway, points to the fact that there is a God who made me. Okay, next verse, Romans 12. Feel free to kind of jump in, raise your hands if you have any questions. I just kind of want to lay down some theology first before I get into application, if you like. Romans 12 verse 3 says, think soberly, according as God has dealt to every man the measure of faith. Okay. God has dealt to every man a measure of faith. Faith is a gift. That's important for me. Faith has been given to me. God has placed eternity in my heart. Ecclesiastes 3:11. God has done it. It's a gift. Faith is also a conduit. Ephesians 2:8. For by grace are ye saved through faith. Now, what do I mean by a conduit? Does anyone not know what a conduit is? I know some maybe for the internationals. It's like a way in. It's like a door. Electrical cables in certain industrial buildings, they're stored in conduits. They get all the cables together and they put them in a big box, pipe, and it's just a way. It's like a big pipe, and So faith can be seen as a conduit, a way in, a way that God has to communicate with us. And he ministers grace to us through that conduit of faith. But he has to give us that faith in the first place. That is really the key thought here. And so far, what are we seeing? We're seeing a pattern that God gave us the faith, and God initiates grace. Not seeing much about ourselves, are we? It's good. The faith of the conduit. So the question we have to ask ourselves, if God has given me faith, and if God has given you faith, what are you going to do with it? He's given you eyes. Where are you going to look? He's given you ears. What are you going to listen to? He's given you faith. What are you going to do with it? It's your choice. But the faith is from Him. Okay. Mark 9:24. I have all my notes typed up. So if anybody really wants them, I can make them available after you've done your outlines. Mark 9:24. And straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief. And the key thought is here, I believe, help my unbelief. Faith is not something that we work up. So I'm giving you things that faith are and some things that faith is not. Faith is not something that we work up. If it's a gift, how could it possibly be something we stir up in ourselves and work up just to be creative? Faith is not something that we produce in the soul. What do I mean by that? Anybody want to guess what I mean by that? Janine? Using your emotions? Anyone else? Will? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a soulish faith would be one that's based upon the mind, the will, and the emotions. An intellectual faith where I just think about it. An emotional faith where I'm just emotionally trusting God, or a will-based faith where in the power of my own will, which is really will worship and self-worship, I'm conjuring up faith that's not really true. Now my soul has to cooperate with the faith that God has given me and its decision, but it's not based in the soul. Sometimes what you see in people who seem to have strong faith is actually a very soul power faith. Sometimes you'll see some guy and that guy's got really strong faith. It's just something they've worked up in the power of their personality and their soul and their will. But it's not real faith. It's not the faith that God has given him. And God will come in and do whatever He can and has to do to destroy soul-ish faith. Because He wants us to go down to a much deeper level of faith, which is a spiritual faith, which may not seem as strong and as powerful as a soul power faith, but it's real. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, or maybe not. Maybe we'll talk about it now. I don't know. Anybody experienced that? Like one day, anybody ever experienced that? Like one moment your faith seems to be very strong, and then things come in and you realize, I just can't trust this way anymore. That's okay. Because I have a conviction that if my faith seems weak, that might be when it's most strong. Because it's no longer me. I got to get myself out of this picture. You know, And when we get to that point where we're holding on by a thread, I've been trusting God for so long for this, and I realize I can't trust this way anymore. I can't make myself have faith. I'm hanging on by a thread, and then I realize God's holding on to me. It's not the other way around. So I believe, but really, frequently I don't. I can make a decision, a weak decision to believe, but in my deep self, there's a lot of doubt. A lot of doubt. And I think all of us have probably experienced this, and we will experience this. And maybe this is what the vast majority of the Christian life is like. Like, not this strong faith that really kind of we sense, but something desperate. And I think that's okay. Now I know, so we have Jesus said several times, ye of little faith and great faith. So I'll just read some of these and kind of just explain them a little bit more. In Matthew 8:26, after Jesus Christ calmed the winds, he said, ye of little faith. I believe he's really talking about not so much size, but effectual. Is it effective? You may have faith, but your faith isn't effective because you're not really trusting me. Whereas Matthew 8:10. I'm having a brainless moment. Okay, Matthew 8:10. He doesn't. Okay, it is that when Jesus healed the centurion's servant, and the centurion says, I'm a man under authority. I say to this man, do this, and he does it. That man, he does it. You just have to give a word. And Jesus' response, I have not found so great faith. No, not in Israel. And again, I don't think it's a question of size. It's a question of effectual faith. Trusting in God. It's very simple. He wasn't drumming it up. He just said, I know you, Jesus. You just have to give a word. Because it's about you, Jesus, and not about me. This will kind of come together shortly. How effectual it is. How effective it is. Because it's a question of who you're trusting. It's not so much how much faith I have in ABC. You could have a lot of faith in the stock market. I could fall any moment. You could have a little bit of faith in Jesus. He'll never fail. It's not a question of how much faith you have. It's really a question of what you do with it. So in Matthew 17:20, Jesus said, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. Luke 17:6, if ye have the faith of a mustard seed, ye might say unto this sycamore tree, be thou plucked up by the root, and be thou planted in the sea, and it should obey you. Mustard seed was a small seed, but it's okay to have mustard seed faith. Mustard seed faith can achieve great things. He didn't say if you have this great, massive faith you can do these things. He said, if you have mustard seed faith, you can do great things. Okay? How are we doing so far? Okay? Alright. Okay, next thing is on Luke 21. Right. Luke 21, the first 4 verses, the story of the widow and her mites. And he looked up, that's Jesus, and saw the rich men casting their gifts into the treasury. And he saw also a certain poor widow casting in thither 2 mites. And he said, Of a truth I say unto you, this poor widow has cast in more than they all. For they all have of their abundance cast in unto the offerings of God. But she, of her penury, has cast in all the living that she had. In other words, out of her want, out of her need, she's given everything. And you might read this and think, okay, well, obviously, it's just great that she trusts God this much. But I like this idea that she gave all the living that she had. She basically gave it all. She gave everything. Dave Chandler was doing the offering yesterday morning and did a great job talking about that, putting God first, and it's God's, it's all God's money and just giving it back to Him. I think of this, she gave everything. I'll read a few more similar stories in Matthew 15:27. And she, who was the Syrophoenician woman, said, Truth, Lord, yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall upon their master's table. Matthew 9:20. And behold, a woman which was diseased with an issue of blood 12 years came behind him and touched the hem of his garment. Mary Magdalene went to the empty tomb. Why? She figured she figured she'd just find a dead Jesus. What was it? What was it about the faith of all of these people? The widow, the woman with the issue of blood, Mary Magdalene, the Syrophoenician woman. We have a concept, and it's wrong, about faith. It's about us, our desires. I trust God for a job, a house, a wife, a husband, more money, health, blah, 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 blah. It can be very presumptive. God can give all those things and He can bless us, but our blessings are much more important and higher than anything like that. And presumption in faith can be this idea that the whole purpose of God is to be a slot machine. The prosperity gospel. One of the worst things out there today. If you just have more faith, you'll be more wealthy. Yeah, you may get more money from somewhere, but you won't have a better relationship with God because of that. And the widow gave everything because that wasn't important to her. Presumption is a very big issue with, I think, with people of faith. There's this idea that if I do something, God's going to take care of me. I want to go to Budapest, so God's going to send me there and give me the money and a ticket and a hotel room. Maybe. Maybe not. Is it right for me to just say, I'm going to go to Baltimore to go to a convention when God hasn't told me to go there? When God hasn't said, if you go to convention, you'll have a place, or here's the money? Is it right just to go there and assume that when you get there, God's going to give you what you want? Go by faith. But God hasn't told you. So what are you really trusting? Are you trusting your own desires more than you trusting what God has for you? Presumption is an issue. So faith is not about our desires, prosperity, slot machines, presumption. What is it about? I think it was these 4 ladies. Presumption was about their devotion to God. That was much more important to them than anything else. Pastor Schaller, he said it before. He mentioned it a few weeks ago in the message. He asked people, what's faith about? Remember? Does anybody remember what he said? Begins with an R. Relationship. Faith is about relationship. Faith is about devotion and relationship. Let me just think about this with some more examples. Okay? Faith is not about problem solving, but about getting to know God in the problem. It's not about problem solving, but getting to know God in the middle of the problem. I don't like that thought, but I have to accept it as a reality. And I've seen it as a reality, and I don't always like it, but getting to know God is, I do like that. But I wish the circumstances sometimes would change. Hey. Faith is about putting God first. Who was the first person in the Bible to put God first? Abel. Hebrews 11:4. By faith, Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain. By faith, a more excellent sacrifice. Why was it more excellent? Don't answer that question, because I'm going to read you Genesis 4:4. And Abel, he brought the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. Genesis 4 is very much a loaded chapter. There's dozens and dozens of things introduced in there. If you want a simple exercise, just read that 4, 5, 10 times and just write 5, 6, 7, 8 things that strike you. Write maybe 5 or 10 doctrines that just are introduced. The blood is introduced. Faith is introduced. All of these things are introduced. Abel gave God the first and the fat. The fat speaking of what was best. Abel put God first in devotion. That was the act of faith. I put God first, not me. It's huge. How many people like to listen to the old archives? Yeah. Anybody ever listen to something? I used to listen to them for hours and hours a day, and suddenly you just stop because Pastor Stephen says something that just kind of like makes you stop and think. Isn't that? Yeah. He was speaking on this, and I remember once he said, I don't know the words exactly, and I cannot remember where he said it, but this offering of Abel was like a precursor to the tithe. It wasn't a tenth like a tithe is, but it was first and best. I kind of heard that, and I had to kind of stop for a few minutes and think, interesting. I like it. Because that's what tithing is, putting God first. It isn't giving God 10% and he'll give us 20 in return. It's not an investment. At least not the way we think of it. It's not like stock market. It's more reliable than the stock market. Yeah, Abel put God first. Cain, on the other hand, couldn't do that. We read this in Genesis 4:14. After Cain had been rejected, this is what he says to God. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face I shall be hid. Notice the order. I have been driven away from the face of the earth, and I will not see your face anymore. Backwards. See, when Cain says, I'm going to be driven away from the face of the earth, he's thinking, what do I want? What am I going to get? Oh, and by the way, I won't see you anymore either, God. Backwards. His first thought should have been, Lord, I'm not going to see your face anymore. And then everything else. Maybe that was the heart of his problem. He didn't put God first. Therefore, he couldn't walk by faith. David? Can you use trust into exchangeable with faith? I think so, yeah. Don't let me forget that one. If I don't cover it, remind me at the end. Okay? Yeah. Okay. So while Cain is saying, I really don't want a relationship with God, what's God doing? Continuing to initiate. Genesis 4:7. If thou doest well, shall thou not be accepted? He's constantly initiating relationship, and Cain is continually saying, no, 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 no. I don't want to place my faith in you. I don't have a devotion towards you, God. I have my own agenda. He's paying for it now. That's a lot of thoughts. Anybody want to comment just in the interim? Okay. Okay, Galatians 5. Yeah, putting God first as an object of faith is a problem for us, because we never know what we're going to get out of it, apart from trouble, and it's that much is guaranteed. Okay. Galatians 5 verse 6. Does somebody want to stand up and read that for me? Galatians 5:6. Somebody with a loud voice. Some young man.
For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything, but faith working through love.
Thank you, Nick. Faith which works by love, or is energized by love. Faith is sourced in God's love for us. Again, God gives it to us. It's God's love that helps our faith grow. How could we trust a God who didn't love us? How could we trust a God that we didn't know loved us? So when we read about these men and women in the Bible that God loved, and we see how He delivered them, does that help our faith? Anybody ever been through anything? Anybody ever have God take them through anything? Well, yeah. I mean, I hope you have. If you haven't, I don't know why you're here. What does it do to your faith? Strengthens it. And when you suddenly find you can't pay the bills, and suddenly the money comes, you lose a job, you get another one, you get a hopeless situation, and something happens that God comes through. Yeah. Hey, I can trust God. I can trust God. That's where faith and trust are the same, because I know God, so now I can trust God. And I can trust God not only that He'll do what I want, that He'll do it, but that what He wants to do will be the right thing. We don't just trust Him for giving us we don't just trust God that He will do what we want Him to do, but rather we trust God that He will make the right decisions and then carry them out. But our faith grows as we see Him come through. This is why God allows us to go up and down and up and down. This is why He likes us to have challenges in our life so that we get to know Him. John 20:29. Jesus saith unto him, Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Blessed are they that have not seen me, and yet have believed. Thomas saw the Lord's wounds, and he believed. He saw them with his eyes. Okay? Point here. Faith is not blind. Faith is not blind. I find that to be an interesting thing. People say, "Oh, it's faith. If I see something, an evidence, then it's no longer faith." Seeing and believing are not incompatible. They are not. Faith is reasonable. Perfectly reasonable to believe. Yes.
Blessed are they who will not see but believe.
I didn't say faith was incompatible with a lack of seeing. I said it was not incompatible with seeing and believing are not incompatible. Not seeing and believing are also not incompatible. I think it's a fair point. Thomas saw, but he believed. But it was still an issue of faith and deciding, I'm going to trust the Lord. Those who didn't see, like us, we still have evidence. We still made a decision that other people have not made. Here's an example. Luke 16:61, the rich man and Lazarus. And he, being Abraham, said unto him, the rich man, if they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. Send Jesus. He'll persuade them. Anybody wondered why Jesus did not appear to Pilate and Caiaphas and all the others after the resurrection? Imagine if he just walked into the synagogue and said, look at my hands. There's holes in them. You killed me and I rose. Now will you believe? But he went to Thomas, who was also doubting. Pilate and Caiaphas would never have believed. It wasn't a lack of evidence. It was a suppression of evidence. It wasn't they didn't have faith, but rather they chose to place their faith in themselves. Pilate was placing it in the Roman system, Caiaphas in the Jewish religious system. Thomas placed his trust in God. It's not the faith, it's what you do with it. But we still see. And it does, and we do wonder, okay, why don't people believe? I'll come to that. Ever wondered why people don't believe? Does it always seem like crazy that for what you know and what you tell people, still people choose not to believe? And you think, are they insane? Yes. Why? It makes no sense to me. But the Israelites saw God deliver them from Egypt. Did they see that? Yeah. How many went into the promised land? 2. Joshua, Caleb. 12 spies went out. 12 spies will all have seen them coming out of Egypt, seen God take on the mighty Egyptian army of Pharaoh, and God prevailed. They take a quick sneak into the promised land. They choose not to believe God. Why? Have they forgotten how awesome God is? Have they forgotten what He did for them? It appears that they did, which is sad, because they had all the evidence. There was no lack of evidence for the Egyptian people who died in the wilderness. They all saw God do what God did, but they still chose not to believe. So what about us? Okay. Back to the book of Hebrews, chapter 3. I'll have you with this in about 5-10 minutes. Hebrews chapter 3, and I'm going to read verses 8 and 12. Harden not your hearts, as in the day of provocation, in the day of temptation in the wilderness. Verse 12. Take heed, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief, in departing from the living God. Why don't people believe? Faith is a heart issue. It's not an intellectual issue, an emotional issue, or willpower issue. It's a heart issue. Faith is about receiving an initiation from God and responding. Faith is about receiving initiation from God and then responding. I hope I can draw this right. Unfortunately, I do not have Pastor Tom Shaller's artistic abilities, so I cannot do the great job he does. If you happen to have done biblical psychology with us a few years ago, this picture is in the textbook in some form. The picture on the right, the Spirit is initiating, God is initiating through the Spirit to man's soul. This heart here is the old heart, hence the hole in it. Ephesians 4:18 talks about the understanding being darkened because of the blindness of the heart. But over here, we have a new heart, and the light goes through and reaches the soul. And that's Ephesians 1:18, the eyes of your understanding being enlightened, that you may know what is the hope of his calling, and what the riches of the glory of his inheritance in the saints. The first one was, they're both Ephesians. The first one was 1:18, second one was 4:18. Sorry, 4:18 and then 1:18. I read them backwards. The point is, if you ever close your eyes, but knowing that it's light, if you close your eyes, it's the middle of the night, close your eyes, someone turns the light on. Do you know? Can you tell the light's gone on? Even though your eyelids are closed, when the light switch goes on, a little bit of light still comes through. Not a lot, just a little bit. Just enough to know that there's light out there. So it is with the heart. Each of us, when we were born, was born with an old heart, a stony heart, which blocks the initiation to our faith. But maybe just a little bit of light gets through, and then God gives us a new heart, which allows a flood of initiation from God. But it is really a heart issue. It's the old heart of man will always try and block out God's light. Does that make sense? As I kind of speaking, it kind of made nonsense to me. But that's okay. I guess it does. All right, I got one page left. Habakkuk 2:4. I'm just going to read eight words. But the just shall live by his faith. Not the just shall live by faith, but the just shall live by his faith, his being, of course, God. This portion is repeated in Romans 1:17, Galatians 3:11, and Hebrews 10:38, speaking to different types of people. Speaking to Jewish people, Greek and Roman people, Asian people, all got the same message: the just shall live by faith, quoting from an Old Testament scripture. The problem is, what does life mean? What does it mean to live? This is where, again, elementary Greek is very useful, or just the desire to get a word study dictionary out and just do a little bit of study. 3 words for life. You do not need to know this. Just telling you. You should. You probably will after a few years. But I just want you to know the principle. Bios life is biological, physical life of the body. Suki life is psychological life of the soul. And Zoe life is a spiritual life. And Zoe life is the one that is used in all these 3 New Testament passages. And it doesn't mean so much that we attain. Oh, yes, it does. How do I put this? When we walk by faith, we live. Isn't that true? That's true. We walk by faith, we live. Like when we make a decision to walk by faith rather than by sight, rather than to know everything, there's a spiritual exhilaration that comes just by trusting God, because God is initiating. Because God is initiating the faith and we are responding. So now we are part of what's going on. That's spiritual life. This is why the faith life is so important to us. It's also very stable. People think that the faith life is unstable, but given that it's trusting in God, it's stable. It's exhilarating, it's lively. We may not like it, we may be weak, but it's actually a very exciting way of living. The other the opposite one is walking by sight. Anxiety produces death. Anyone ever been anxious? Yeah? Feel dead as a consequence? Feel completely bleh? Doubt in the Greek, which is the opposite of faith, actually means to dissect or to analyze. It's like, okay, God, I will believe you if you tell me how you're going to do it. I'm going to deliver you out of Egypt. Okay, Lord, I will believe if you tell me how. No, I'm going to deliver you out of Egypt. Are you going to believe me? Or do you want to analyze it? God doesn't do things the way we do anyway, so why bother trying to analyze? Just accept it. Just look at his track record. So faith produces life, and that's, hey, is he going to be the source of our life? Final verse, 1 Peter 1:7. First Peter 1:7. We there yet? If not, I'll go anyway. That the trial of your faith, being much more precious than of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. Mm. Faith will be tested. Job 13:50, though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. I will be tested. And maybe the question is not, is my faith going to be strong? You think, okay, is my faith going to be strong in this trial? I think it's the wrong question. Maybe, is it going to be weak? Because am I going to cry out in desperation and say, Lord, I need you. I need you to give me the faith. And when I think about the trial of my faith, and my faith in general, I have only one question. Who does my faith glorify? Does our faith glorify God, or does it glorify me? If my faith glorifies me, soul power, willpower, intellect, emotions, you name it. If it glorifies me, it's not of God. Faith could be the weakest faith on the planet, and you come into church and you really don't trust God, but you do, and you're just kind of crawling on your hands and knees. But you glorify God in the process. And that is very honorable. Questions? Comments? Luis?
It just seems like in the United States, since we have everything more than other countries, you know, you go to Africa and those people are praying all the time, and it seems like they're
Yeah.
faith, you know what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
Yeah, we do have everything in America. We have everything in England too. And then God takes it away. Including our faith. It is. Yeah. How can you? Yeah. How can we? Do you actually want me to answer that question? How can you compare the faith? I think. How do you compare faith in Africa to faith in America, where Africans have nothing? I think we understand that the same problems have affected Africa as America. Prosperity gospel. They've both been hit. Africa, trust God and you will be wealthy. America, trust God and you'll remain wealthy. It's the same thing. And I don't know how God's going to deal with it. And I know that He brings in things on a very personal level to the point where we have to trust God. And I don't know where this country's going. I know God has a plan. We could become more wealthy. We could become poor. Who knows? I don't know. You read about the persecuted church. It's the most beautiful church in the world. And I want nothing to do with it, but it's the reality. You know. Anyone else? Yes.
I just have a hard time seeing that faith is only a gift, because like you say that it's an initiation from God that
Yeah.
I receive.
Yeah.
So then that I can see the gift there, but then responding,
Yeah.
that is more.
Okay, the gift is a response. You have eyes. Your eyesight is a gift. And you see something and you make a decision based upon what you see. But you were given the eyes. Your faith was a gift. So God initiates something to your faith, and you sense it, and you think, okay, what am I going to do with it? Does that not make sense still?
Faith.
Yeah, but it's more question. None of these things is always 100% explainable in English, because it's such a second story thing. I guess my point is when you have people who are so, I have strong faith. Look at me. Look at how strong my faith is, and it's not really faith. That's my point. But you were given it. You were given that faith, some small amount of measure, and what do you do with it? It comes from God's initiation, and that really is where it comes down to. Gary.
Maybe explain, like, what's practical? Like, I mean, I don't think everybody who struggles in their faith, falls away from the church and is against God, but possibly they feel that there's a more practical approach. Is there such a thing as
Is there
practical
is there a
faith?
practical approach to faith? You have a job, right? You have to get up every morning. You had to apply for that job. You had to, look nice when you went to the interview. That's practical. You have to eat well. It's not this hyper spiritual faith where we're kind of, I trust God for everything, and I'm just going to sit and wait, and He's going to carry me and guide every step and tell me every single thought to think all day. I think the practical faith, to me, is how I respond to the difficulties as they come in. Do I turn to God or do I not turn to God? Did that explain it at all? This could be a long that could be a long topic. David, is a quick one. Faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God. Yes, it's true. Yeah. The word will increase our faith. David?
Dependence on God has a lot to do with faith, like a relationship to I can't do it. Not a place that I
Dependence upon God. Dependence upon God does play a huge part, but I don't think it plays a part insofar as we're just kind of so passive that we don't take care of our responsibilities. If that explains it. Last one, David.
When you say, when God gives you the faith, what do you do with it? It almost seems circular because it seems the only thing you can do with it is go back to Him, go right back to Him and say, I can't do anything with this.
The faith seems circular. Responding seems circular. I can't do anything with it. Maybe, but people still.
Go right back and say, okay, you gave me this faith, now I can't do this, I can't without.
Yeah, and therefore there's more faith. Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you. Part of this class is not to put into a box and say this is what faith is, this is how you do it, but rather to spark conversations, to get you thinking a little bit outside the box and to study more and to talk more and ask questions more. That's what. No. Okay, sir. Yeah.
Proverbs 24:10, if thou faint in the day of adversity, thy strength is small. So in the same context, faith is a response as well as something that's given. How does Abraham being the father of faith, how does he know to go to God if God hadn't given him the hearing, what was the word of God, to go and to approach God now, to come out of his comfort zone? That's adversity. Whenever you leave home, there's always going to be some adversity to follow. Even him going on track, but even coming back, God is a faithful one. So from listening to the lesson, what I learned from it was how you said, well, I've been using my faith to change some bad habits, to get out of some poverty situations, but I keep finding myself going back in those situations because I've been using my faith for relationship calls.
Okay. What's your name, sir? Marcus. Is this your first time here? Maybe I haven't been paying attention. Okay. Thank you. Okay. 10 minutes. Come back. I overshot a little bit. Meet back here at 7:30. Okay. Thanks.